Welcome to the IonaHoops.com podcast with your host, Guy Flottico.
Yo, season 3, episode 18 of the IonaHoops.com podcast is here, and so are the Gales. Last episode, I talked about how vital this past weekend would be for Iona, and we learned a whole lot, that's for sure. We'll hit up a recap, and we'll preview the wild and crazy Buffalo trip. And we've got past visitor to the podcast, Rachel Lenzi from the Buffalo News, back to help us take a look ahead. But for now, we'll look at some Iona Iotas.
Iona Iotas.
Speaking of Buffalo trips, they've done it again. The Iona women swept the swing up north, including a win over the second-place Niagara Purple Eagles last Thursday. And the Lady Gales have now won 11 straight. 11 straight. Iona is 2 games up on second-place Quinnipiac, whom they've already swept. Niagara dropped to third, and they've already been swept. They have a 3-game lead on Fairfield, the only team to have beaten them in league play this year. So, yeah, the ladies will have to take care of business in AC when all is said and done. But hey, let's dare to dream. The women have a net of only 142. The MAC isn't what you would call a stellar league for women's hoops. What about bracketology? On ESPN's version, the Lady Gales currently earmarked for a 14 seed and a date with North Carolina and Chapel Hill. Tough draw for sure. Much like the men, a 13 likely helps the cause a little. It's worth noting right now that the Lady Gales do have a chance to win out based on the remaining games they have in MAC play. And if they indeed do so and then go through AC, a 13 might just be in the cards. Who would have thunk it that we'd be talking about this stuff on the women's side and not the men's right now?
Iona Iotas.
It's February, and the MAC's going to MAC. 2 of the top 4 teams in the league standings lost at home yesterday. Siena, again without Javian McCullum, fell at home at MVP Arena in front of 7,000 fans to Niagara, while Mount St. Mary's, coming off of getting destroyed at Iona, went into Hamden and beat Quinnipiac. Meanwhile, Ryder had 2 easy wins this weekend and is suddenly in first place as the league's hottest club. Hey, remember during the offseason I kept hinting that I'd pick Ryder to finish first in the MAC? Anyway, Niagara's win truly has them on the upper echelon now. Suddenly, we have a clear top 5 at the moment. Again, still a month of hoops to go, but maybe we're starting to see a clearer picture. Oh, again, of course, next week's pod, I'll be telling you about how the standings have all shaken up because, well, the MAC's going to MAC. Hey, how about this? 2 straight episodes with an offer roundup.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Former Iona big Trey James out of Kentucky didn't work out here, but that doesn't mean the Gales have given up on the Bluegrass State. Iona recently offered class of 2023 Jacob Meyer, a 6'2" point guard out of Holy Cross High in Covington, Kentucky. Meyer has a healthy list of mid-major offers, most recently from Manhattan and Austin Peay. He's one of the top scorers in the state, and he's formerly had committed to Western Kentucky before decommitting. Okay, let's take a look at this past weekend's games against Mount St. Mary's and Fairfield. Iona fans, and probably MAC fans in general, went into this past weekend's action wondering if Iona would ride that momentum from last weekend's second half versus Quinnipiac to these games. I mean, Quinny broke us like a month ago. It would only make sense that we'd fix ourselves against the Bobcats as well, right? Sure, logic makes sense, right? And it certainly seemed that way as well. Iona absolutely destroyed Mount St. Mary's Friday, 81-51. After leading by that same 30-point margin at halftime. I mean, this was back to pre-Quinny type games. The defense holding opponents under 40%, turning them over under lots of pressure D, balanced offense from our stars, and contributions from others. It was all here. It was great to see us come out with pressure defense despite just having 9 scholarship guys available. Iona did not have Brookshire or Florence due to COVID, and of course have not had Slazinski or Jefferson for a while. So given that, I'm a bit surprised we did press, but maybe Pitino listens to this podcast. Who knows? All I know is that D triggered everything else, and the mount was reduced to an anthill. Just a couple quick numbers. 20 for Clayton, 15 and 13 for Nelly, 13 and 6 for Dennis, 12 apiece for Barrick and Cruz Davis. Here's what Rick Pitino had to say after the win.
So we played a great first half, and I told the guys it's very difficult to win the second half with this type of lead. So you got to focus on executing, and the last 5 minutes of the second half were good. The first 15 were not, but it's tough to play with that type of lead. We've never had that type of lead. But overall, it was a good performance. I told the guys going into the finals that we're going to play 2-game tournaments. This is the semifinal and final of the MAC tournament, and you prepare for that. I did that at Kentucky as well. So every game now we're playing for the championship with Fairfield. And we're going to do that all the way through, just to have the mentality of playing every possession.
Coach, just asked Nelly Jr. Joseph about the consistency, a lot of energy in the first half, inside plays, but also on defense, avoiding fouls.
You know, we played a great first half all around. Nelly's got to explode higher inside. When he doesn't get an athletic step to the basket, he doesn't jump real high. And he's got to work on that, but he's getting better at it. DJ and Walt played really well. Barrick played fine. Got to get Sadiku and Silas to play better to enhance our bench. I thought James gave us a great pass at halftime, passed up an open shot, and referees should have cut him a break a little bit.
Beating a bad team at home is nice, but let's face it, the focal point of this weekend was a road date at Fairfield in their shiny new arena. And for sure, that building is outright gorgeous. The shooting yesterday for both teams, not so much. This game was a real grind in the first half, but the Gales toughed it out to an 8-point lead. Iona just absolutely owned the early part of the second half and opened up a 21-point margin. But once again, the Gales couldn't wrap it up and put a bow on it. The Stags pushed all the way back down to 5 before stellar free throw shooting sealed in 70-61 win. As I said earlier, this wasn't particularly pretty for either team, especially from deep. The squads combined to go 4 of 36 from behind the arc. To put that in perspective, one of the fifth three-pointer of the day was from the Fairfield mascot, so he had 20% of the threes made at the arena yesterday. Anyway, thankfully, the Gales were sharp from much closer. 20 of 23 from the line, actually. Nelly was a beast again, 18 points, 16 boards. Dennis had 18, Clayton 13. But most important, an Iona team that hasn't been great on the road put up a much better effort, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. We wanted to know if this team is back, and it certainly feels like it. It's still a work in progress, mind you. I think Pitino's right that we do need some more bodies to contribute off the bench. But we also should feel a lot better about things right now than we did at, say, halftime of the Quinney game about a week ago. Here's Rick Pitino after the win over the Stags.
So it was a good win, beautiful place. By far, the job they did was amazing, and it's just a spectacular place. Right size, everything is first class.
Coach, good first half, good start to the second half, but then Fairfield went on. I think it was an 18-4 run. What was different in that part of the game?
Well, what happens, like we're an excellent pressing team, you could see that. But when you don't score, you can't press. So if we're not shooting a decent percentage, you can't get the press on. And that's been our Achilles heel the whole year. We've said it we're not a great shooting team. And Nelly missed a lot of inside bunnies that he should make. Once we could get our press on, then it'd be excellent, but we couldn't get it on. But the press, I thought, was great the entire night. We played very good defense, and certainly we didn't shoot the ball as well as we can. But when you lose Quinn, he's your best three-point shooter, it hurts the team.
All right, it's time to preview this weekend's games. The dreaded Buffalo trip at Canisius and at Niagara. Ah, yes, it's that time of the year, the dreaded Buffalo trip. But should we be dreading it? In MAC games, Niagara is just 4-2 thus far this season at home, with wins over Mount St. Mary's, Ryder, Manhattan, and Canisius, but losses to Siena and Marist. The Ryder win is impressive, but losing at home to Marist? Now, Canisius has had a bad year all around with home losses to Marist and Manhattan and a win over Siena. Remember, they did get robbed by the Buffalo Blizzard of 2 home games that actually were played at Niagara, and those were both losses to Ryder and Mount St. Mary's. So Niagara's been the tougher foe for sure this year, but one of the teams that won one of the teams that won at Gallagher, Siena, then turned around and lost at Canisius 2 days later. So getting the sweep is indeed tough, right? Well, how hard could it be? Cellar dweller Marist pulled it off this year. But this is the MAC. They're the only team that has won both legs, strangely enough. Not Siena, not Ryder. Marist. It should be noted that Quinney has not made the trip just yet. It should also be noted that Ryder barely got out of there with a win, and it was one of those semi-home games for the Griffs that they got the squeaker. So in other words, they were almost swept up in Buffalo. So all of this, combined with Iona's generally uneven play on the road this season, and not only this season, but under Patino in general, makes this weekend a little more likely for Iona fans to fret. So let's start with the Griffs as we play them Friday night. And as I said, they can be good enough to beat somebody. How about Siena, for instance? But they are the weakest defensive team in the MAC, and I know Iona should not have scoring issues, which means we'll be able to press, which means we should be fine. So, logical, but we know the MAC's going to MAC. Nothing's that simple. The Griffs may have found something in freshman guard Taj Savetsky, averaging 11 points a game, a nice compliment to their best player, Jordan Henderson. The Griffs aren't bad at valuing the basketball, so how they handle Iona's press could determine how that one goes. But this is a 5-17 Canisius team, let's face it. Road or not, Iona needs to win this one. Now, the game at Gallagher against Niagara will be the harder of the two, logically. Although, as I noted, don't tell Siena that. The Perps are now a top 5 MAC team and have won 4 straight. Now, you know they have Noah Thomason, who's looking like a first-team All-MAC player for sure. But perhaps the reason for this push is the emergence of 6'7" sophomore forward Aaron Gray. He's averaging 12.8 points, 4.9 rebounds. You got to account for him. He's had a 30-point game this year, a 27-point game this year, so he can erupt. Now, what the Perps do is get you to play their game, which is slow. Niagara is 354th nationally in tempo. For comparative purposes, Iona is 74th. Think Iona's press is going to play a role in this one? You got to speed up the Perps and take them out of their game. The other thing the Perps do, they don't even want you to get threes off. They're 8th in the country in 3-point attempts against per game. Now, Iona should be just fine with this. Let's attack the paint. We have Nelly. Do they have anybody who can even guard Nelly? Iona doesn't always bypass those 3-point tries and sometimes shoots themselves into trouble. Believe me, that's what Niagara is going to be counting on come Sunday. So, to summarize, we've got to keep pressing and imposing our will on opponents if we're going to keep these winning ways, especially on the road for the dreaded Buffalo trip. And really, who knows Buffalo better than Rachel Lenzi, Buffalo News college hoops writer? She joined us last year, if you recall, and now it's time to see what she thinks of the Gales' annual visit to the northwest corner of the state. Well, Iona and MAC fans everywhere talk about the dreaded Buffalo trip every year. But one thing we don't dread in this podcast is welcoming back Rachel Lenzi, college beat writer for the Buffalo News. First off, Rachel, here's hoping you were safe and got by okay a little ways back with the blizzards hitting your area. We know they breed you a little different up there, but I hope you came out of that relatively unscathed. And now you guys have an earthquake today. What's going on up there?
We're waiting for the locusts and the tornadoes to come through to complete like the biblical passage, but it's kind of wild. In Buffalo, we're made a little different. So we survived the Christmas storm, which is literally so not last year. Now that we got an earthquake this morning, I think my neighborhood escaped unscathed, so it's not that terrible. It's just another day here in Buffalo.
Yeah, I was going to say, but we were stunned to see that, Canisius had to move a couple of their games to Niagara and all that. I mean, how much really changed up there when that was going on?
There was a lot of areas didn't have power in the city. heat was missing. There were buildings damaged at Canisius. There was some damage to the Kessler Athletic Center where Canisius plays its home games, and they've had structural issues there for a while now. So Canisius had to pick up its program and head up to its most fierce regional rival to play up at the Gallagher Center, which is a lot different than the Kessler Athletic Center, because Gallagher Center is a very low slung building. The basketball court is actually on the second floor of the building above the student union. So it's a very low slung roof. So you walk in and it's just loud. It is. I walked in for a women's basketball game. It was a 6:00 tip off. I got to the building around a little before 5 one afternoon, and it was so loud. And I said, "Oh my gosh, you could hear it out in the street." And I said, "Did the game start already?" No, it was just music during warm-ups. But that's how loud it is. And when they get a packed crowd into the Gallagher Center like they did last week for Niagara Canisius, you can barely hear yourself think. So I was not surprised last week that Canisius really made it a game against Niagara, but I wasn't like, oh my gosh, when I saw that they went 0 for 8 in a stretch of nearly 6 minutes from the floor and just could not produce shots. Canisius just ran out of gas. That's been the problem this year. They'll play competitively. They'll put their best foot forward. Even they were down 3 players the other night, but it was those last 6-7 minutes. They just they ran out of gas. That's what happened.
Okay. Well, we definitely will dive into Canisius. The Gales are traveling, and they'll see them first. So whether real or imagined, the Buffalo trip has certainly claimed its share of scalps over the years. Good MAC teams have gone on there and have not been able to sweep. Even this year, we've seen Siena only get a split. Ryder, right now in first place, only get a split. And yet Marist somehow went up there and won both games this year. Now, Niagara's had a pretty decent year as far as Canisius, not so much, 5-17. Yeah, to me, it feels like they're probably one of the most dangerous 5-17 teams that has ever existed. So let's talk about them a bit. Poor record, but they're certainly not devoid of talent. What's gone on there in your eyes this season?
They're not devoid of talent, but again, they've had injury issues all season. They can't finish games. They're very good defensively. Reggie's teams are always teams. You look at their assist totals. They will share the ball. They will slow down the pace of play. One thing they did really well against Niagara, particularly in the first half, they really limited Niagara's inside play and forced Niagara to go to Aaron Gray and Noah Thompson at the perimeter. And Aaron Gray and Noah Thompson, they were making NBA range 3 with a hand in their faces. So there wasn't really anything they could do, but they really shut down the inside game. Including Sam Iorio and Harlan Obioha, the 7-foot freshman who's at Niagara, but there's just a team that can't sustain it. I would say that's the toughest I've seen Canisius play. But again, the disappointment is they can't sustain it. It's not that they're giving up on this team. They for lack of a better term, they run out of gas at a certain point. Against Niagara, they weren't finishing possessions. Niagara was thriving off transition and had this 14-2 rally in those 6 minutes to win the game. So that's really what it was. This team does not know how to finish games. So that is what's holding Canisius back. It's kind of what's held Canisius back the last couple of years. And I asked Jordan Henderson after the game, I was like, Jordan, your season's coming down to a matter of weeks at this point. Can you do that? I was like, I'm trying to find the right word. Is there a way you can learn from this and make yourself a little stronger? Because your season's down to a matter of weeks now. And he pretty much filled in the urgency of this. I'm trying to remember the exact quote he told me, but he's like, we have to get it together if we want to continue playing games. And it's like, it's a pretty good way of looking at it as well too. I can't remember the exact quote again, but I'm sorry, I'm not prepared with this quote. I didn't think I was going to have to reference it, but yeah, it was just something like, he understood it. If Canisius wants to do anything in the MAC tournament, they've got to do this. Jordan Henderson, I found the quote. He said to me, we play hard the first 30 minutes. Toward the end of the game, you got to lock in. You've got to be focused. You can't make simple mistakes like finishing possessions, boxing out, and he said the little things that add up where they missed it. And this is the quote he said to me at the end. He said, if we have any hope to continue on playing, we have to turn it around now. And it's like, well, you got a month, you got a month, Chris, figure it out and maybe salvage some of the season.
So we all know by now the MAC is going to MAC. We've seen the MAC's better team struggle on each leg of this trip. Siena defied logic by winning at Gallagher, but then losing at Kessler. Here at Iona, as good as we've been over the years, we take nothing for granted, home or away. Certainly Iona's going to be favored against Canisius, but they can be had up in that atmosphere. How does Canisius beat Iona on Friday?
They do the same thing they do, limit the middle, force shots outside, play a little better defense at the perimeter, and do what Jordan Henderson says, do those small things, turn those empty possessions into second chance points, or grab the pass and reset the shot clock. Again, Reggie's teams at Canisius have always been very good at sharing the basketball, at slowing down the pace of the game. And that's what they have to make Iona play on their terms, not on Iona's terms, which is a little hard to do considering the success that Iona has been having under Rick Pitino lately. Niagara did that very well last year when they beat Iona up at Gallagher Center. And I remember towards the end of that game, Niagara just turned on the Jets and said, all right, we're going to finish this. And that is something that is hard for teams to do, especially with with Canisius, talking about two teams here. With Canisius, I don't feel like they've ever really had that killer instinct instilled in them in the time that I've covered them. Maybe they had it the first couple of years here, but I wasn't here to cover those programs. But it just feels like there's not that go for the jugular sense with that team, which teams have to have, even in the mid majors and lower majors. You have to be able to finish those games and finish them consistently and do it not just in the last 2 minutes, but in the last 10 minutes, in the second half.
Okay, I've seen the Grits a few times this year, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. It's kind of scary. It's right on the mark. Kind of a hidden secret for them is Tasha Vesky. He just seems like he has potential to be a very good player as he matures. What have you seen in him, or what other kind of glimmers of hope are you seeing in the program?
I like Taj Savesky. I think he's a cornerstone player for that team in the future. I really like Jaco Fritz's inside-outside game. His brother's been hurt. I hope his brother turns into the same player as well too. And they're going to miss Jordan Henderson when he's gone too. That's another one. He's Mr. Consistent. He's their best player on the court as well too. And it's just sad because Canisius has such a rich basketball history, and it's disappointing just to see they're competitive, but they can't win games. They can't be up in those top 5-6 teams of the Metro, and it's kind of sad because people you go into the games and it's there's not an excitement people around there. I was at the Canisius St. Bonaventure game where Canisius won in overtime, second game of the season, and you could feel the excitement. It was half Bonaventure fans, but it gave some hope early on in the season. And it's sad now. It just feels like same old Canisius, and that's a sad stage for the program, because that's a program I like seeing mid-major teams be successful. I think it's better for the good of all basketball, for the good of all college basketball, which is why do we go into the NCAA tournament loving teams like St. Peter's? All those years we'd see Iona and Siena with those teams with Fran McCaffrey and I cannot remember and Ryan Rossiter on those teams. We love those kind of teams, the Cleveland States. I think it's better for all of college basketball. It's not parity, but you see these smaller competitive teams that are really thriving, and I love seeing that. And that is something as a basketball fan that I want to see teams, not just in Buffalo, not just in the Big Four here, but I want to see that for the MAC. I want to see that for the A10 as well too.
Is Spoon safe, or is he on the hot seat?
Well, I've been told he's in the second to last year of his contract. So there's been some transition at Canisius. They have a new president who's just come in, Dr. Stout. I'm sure he's in evaluation mode as well too. We saw turnover at St. Bonaventure in their administration with new president after Dr. Napero died, a new athletic director after Tim Kenny's contract was not renewed. So I think anything's on the table at this point as well too. So I can't give any indication on what Reggie's future is, other than knowing, that I've been told he has one more season left on his contract after this season.
All right, let's switch over to Niagara, coming off a very grinded out win at Siena on Sunday. Everybody knows what kind of year Noah Thompson's had. He's going to be first team All-MAC, barring something crazy. But there's another guy I want to ask you about. Tell me about Aaron Gray.
Aaron Gray's kind of not hidden in the shadows, but he came alive last week against Canisius because he's getting the ball. He was in the second opportunity that, when Noah Thompson couldn't make a shot, he looked to Aaron Gray. Again, Canisius did a very good job at pushing Niagara's offense out to the perimeter, out to making long shots as well. I looked down, I think at halftime, Niagara only had 8 points in the paint, which is very uncharacteristic for them as well, too. So Aaron's the kind of guy, if Noah has a bad night, if Noah's not making shots, they can go to Aaron as well for it. In this case, the inside game was not having a good game during the first half. So they had another outlet they could go to. And, Aaron really, really, showed what he was about, that he could be that reinforcement as well. And, we saw that also just, in that second half against Canisius, where they made that 12-2, 14-2 run there and inside the 7-minute mark, that Aaron and Noah helped really spearhead that. And, there were players that were working off transition as well to create those opportunities as well. And that's what teams have to do, in those kind of games as well. I caught the late part of the Siena game, and Niagara got a little lucky. Siena missed those 2 final free throws inside the 20-second mark. And I just kind of went, well, come on, free throws are free points, essentially. You have to make those as well. They got the help of a good bounce as well, too. But I think they're creating momentum to go into January as well. And Aaron Gray's been a big part of that.
So you've got, winners of 4 straight, playing certainly one of the hotter teams right now. Is Quinnipiac's cooled off, Siena's cooled off. Iona's starting to get itself right again, but has not quite there yet. But I think Niagara lost 4 straight before this stretch. What's led to this turnaround?
It was, I think they stepped their game up against their big rival, Canisius. They fed off the crowd at, in their home court as well. And Greg Paulus has really emphasized the philosophy of, looking at the calendar and saying, hey, this is when we really, really have to turn it on as well, too. They've also had some of their younger players, like Harlan Obiaha, who isn't getting great minutes, but he's coming in, he's doing strong defensive things underneath as well that are helping set up this team. Sammy Iorio didn't have a great night against Canisius, but he, offensively, but Harlan was right there to step in. They've got Braxton Bayless, who's coming on, who's coming in and making key shots and making key defensive plays as well. And they're starting with the defensive game. Another thing that's really interesting about Niagara, they protect the ball really, really well. They look, they believe in look at their assist to turnover ratio is pretty ridiculous as well, too. So that's another tenet. Greg preaches to them, you have to take care of your own basketball. That's where everything is going to begin. He doesn't care if it's a defensive rebound, if it's an inbounds play, if it's a pass to a teammate. That is the one thing they always have to do. That's a requirement at Niagara.
Iona Niagara is definitely a story of tempo when they face off. The Gales, of course, are going to press and try to speed things up. Like you said, Niagara handles the ball very well. But Patino has talked about this nonstop. It's not always about trying to turn you over, it's just trying to also about wearing you down if you press most of the game. Of course, to keep Iona from pressing constantly, you have to make them miss shots. How's Niagara going to make Iona miss shots?
They're going to have to tinker their defense. Again, they're going to have to clog that inside play and force to the outside. They're going to have to be a little more mindful of their possession and possession time as well.
And it seems like every year under Greg, the Niagara's entered the year, they not looking like they're going to be so hot on paper. And then you look up and there they are, either middle of the pack, maybe a little higher. Here they are again, feeling like a team that's going to be in that 4-5 game in Atlantic City. What's he doing to build the culture there? And do you ever see a potential where Niagara is going to maybe make that next step and become one of those teams that's always in the top 3 in the conference?
I'll start with the top 3 question first. That's always going to be a question mark because we don't know how the transfer portal is going to impact Niagara. I mean, they lost Marcus Hammond last year. They lost about 4 or 5 players to the transfer portal, had to re-recruit a whole new team. That is tough to create consistency. You have to re-recruit your own players. You have to bring in new players and convince them why they want to come to Niagara, this tiny little metro school up in on the border of Canada. And you have to quickly impress what the culture. You have to sell these guys on the team, and part of that is Greg's personality as well too. The coaches have to sell that as well. That's a tough thing, I think, for any college basketball program to do, is to, especially with the turnover at the mid major and low major rates. I mean, guys might want to go. It depends on who he brings back every year, how he quickly impresses the values. What kind of staff is going to stay. He lost his top assistant, Brian Smothers, who became the head coach at Wayne State, and Brian was very big in creating those kind of positive relationships as well too. He was kind of, I don't want to say the good cop to Greg's bad cop. He was more like the right-hand man to Greg, there as well. He was really, really good at building relationships with people. And, it was kind of the guy to do that. There's so much that can impact that. And you do wonder, how does the team, you're not going to have the teams like Joe Mahalik had, where you had guys on the roster for 3-4 years, where you had consistency. Every year is about recreating that consistency and doing it almost at, in basketball, eons at warp speed.
Yeah. Well, Rachel, it's going to be a very interesting weekend up there for the Iona Gales. I feel like every weekend we see a crazy shake up in the standings. So who knows what we're going to be looking at come Sunday night when we look at the standings again, and there's a huge shift, and who knows who's going to be in first. Either way, of course, it's been a pleasure having you on again, and we look forward to connecting with you down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it and enjoy the conversation.
And thank you. And hopefully we'll see you in Atlantic City.
Yeah. Thanks.
All righty. Take care. Thanks again to Rachel Lenzi from the Buffalo News for joining us this episode of the podcast, The Dreaded Buffalo Trip. Or will it be dreaded? Who knows? We'll find out. It's going to be an interesting couple of games, and will tell us a little more about these Gales. So stay tuned and go Gales.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the IonaHoops.com podcast. This podcast is a production of IonaHoops.com with publisher Guy Filatico. The opinions shared during this podcast are those of Guy Filatico, IonaHoops.com, and any featured guests. This podcast is not affiliated with Iona University Athletics or the university itself. Thank you for supporting IonaHoops.com.